In this video tutorial, we're going to look at some of the basic audio features in Adobe Premiere Pro, and this has been updated to show the Creative Cloud, the CC version, a little bit different from CS6. So let's open our project, and I've already got something opened here. It's the project with the SeaWorld footage that we looked at in class the other day. And what I'm doing is starting a brand new timeline. So I thought I would do this and start cutting in the clips again from the beginning and show you some of the audio features while I start that. First thing to look at, and it may be displayed the same way on your workstation. If you work in the lab in 132, it probably will, and that's this place right here in the center between our source and our program window, and this is my audio meter. It's got these negative numbers along the side here, and then it goes all the way up to 0. Talk more about that in a second, but that's very important to have that on display whenever you're editing. By default in Premiere, it often comes up over on the right side of the timeline over here. I tend to like it front and center because I always want it to be right where my eyeballs can see it while I'm either looking at a source clip or scrolling through my timeline and the program window. So let's go back and let me show you the clip that I just put in here. It's the opening shot for this sequence. So it's right here. It's this performance shot of the two whales jumping, and this is in the script for the story. It says put that in first. That's my first shot, B-roll with natural sound. So let's go ahead and play it, and we'll watch the volume meter. I'll scroll it back a little bit, and if you noticed, when the audio meter first comes up, it's typically going to display, again, these values. It also has the right and the left channel. So as I scrub, you see how those two bars, the two green bars, are sort of split left and right? So one is what you'd hear in the left headphone or your left earpiece. The other is the right side or the right earpiece. It's a single audio track, but it's a stereo pair. So the left side and the right side all bundled into one audio track. And in my timeline, that's the A1 track right here. Notice that it peaked right here around the -12. Right there. That might be a little bit of a problem. I might need to tweak that down a little bit. We'll show you that in a minute. But the important thing to note here is that the scale that's being used is a scale for digital audio. Notice down at the bottom it says dB. Well, that stands for decibels. This scale in particular is for digital, and it really is the dBFS scale, which means decibels, full scale. So dBFS is the scale, and the top of the scale is 0. When you hit 0, that means you've topped out and you start to get distortion. You're overmodulated. So that's the ceiling, and we never want to get up to 0. In fact, we never really want to peak anywhere close to 0. A better gauge for our peak is somewhere around this -18. What we can do is look for average peaks to bounce around here. Sometimes they'll get as loud as -12 to -8 or 9, but we really want to keep an average right around there. That's when we have a voice of somebody talking, the reporter, or a soundbite, or even with its NAT sound where we want to push the volume of that NAT all the way at full volume. So that's what we're doing for the opening shot, is just starting off strong, no reporter yet, just the whales and the show. And so I can read the peak there, and I can adjust that later. Something else I want to show you here is, by default, again, most of the time you open this audio meter, it will display what's called a gradient. So it'll gradually shade from green into yellow and then into the bright yellows and the reds. When it hits red, you're hitting that ceiling, and that's, of course, a warning. I don't like to see it in that way. I like to see more discrete values. So what I do is I right-click inside this meter, anywhere in there, and I turn off the color gradient. Now watch what happens when I scroll through. You see it at -18 there? The values start to turn, or the color turns yellow starting at -18. So I see the green up to 18, then I know I'm in yellow. Yellow is what we call the headroom. This is area where I can still peek into the yellow, but it also tells me, hey, yellow's a bit of a warning. You don't want to push too far into the yellow, because after that comes the red at the very top. So if we started seeing red colors, that means we're peaking way at the top, which we don't want to do. So I like to, again, turn off the gradient and show it like this. The other thing I like to do is when I'm mixing to look at for my top peaks, my highest volume through the sequence, I right click and I say, show me the static peaks, not dynamic. Dynamic just bounces up and down, and it puts that little yellow line at the top, and then it sort of disappears when you stop playing. When you turn it to static peaks, watch what happens now. We'll go back. See the yellow line? The yellow line will stay on the display when I'm done scrubbing or playing the timeline. This is my static peak, and I like that because it tells me the loudest that this track has gotten so far is on the left channel. It peaked at about -9, and on the right channel about -10, right there. So let's go back to, we're going to change this clip later in the next tutorial by using a keyframe. We'll adjust that volume. But for the rest of this tutorial, I'm just going to go quickly pick up my voiceover clip because I know I've got the reporter's voice and I want to start laying her voice in right after my opening shot. So I can simply take the voiceover clip, the news voiceover, double click it. It's going to launch it into the source window, just like source video. Except all we see here is the waveform plot, the audio waveform, which is very important. And this is like amplitude over time. So it's the peaks and valleys in the audio. When you see a dead spot, like right there, that's a pause. That's a silent part of the audio. This is where she's talking, pause, more talking, pause, and we see the peaks and valleys. So that's very important. So what I'm going to do is just listen to her voice, and I could really make an adjustment here if I see if there's a volume problem. Let's go ahead and listen first.
Yes, it's another opening, another show, but not just any show, and it would take a lot more than an 8x10 gloss.
Okay, we know enough right there to see that the peak is coming in. We hit a max of -6. That's a little hotter than I would like. So I'd like to average somewhere down around here, remember, and maybe have my top peak be about the -12. So this is going to need a little bit of an adjustment, and I can actually do that right here in the source window. I can change the gain, adjust the volume here before I even cut it in the timeline, and then anytime I use her voice track, it will be at the new level. It'll be adjusted based on how I fix it here. The other option is just to start cutting it into the timeline and then go back and fix it from the timeline. Since I know this track, it's all her voice, the whole recorded track all the way through, I'm just going to go ahead and adjust it right now. And this could be as simple as just right-clicking and going to the gain, or if we use the keyboard, we can use the Shift-G key. I'll do that again. So I was in here and I could have right-clicked and gone to audio gain, or if I hit Shift-G, it already brings up my audio gain tool. So I could go in here and start making adjustments. What I'm going to do is choose the normalize all peaks to -12. Watch what happens. Let's play it back now and let's look at the scale right over here.
Yes, it's another opening, another show, but not just any show, and it would take a lot more than an 8x10 gloss.
Okay, see what's happening now? Now the maximum peak is -12, and it's really telling us don't peak anywhere over -12. So I just sort of brought her down to the level that I need for my broadcast. Now we're not peaking up there at -9 or higher anymore. So we're staying, -18 is still the average.
Not for this project. This is Believe.
You know, some syllables peak a little bit lower that are softer down here, but the loud syllables, the loudest one is hitting -12.
Whale show at SeaWorld, where the on-stage
And that's going to be pretty acceptable. So I've got that all set. So I can simply then just mark in and mark out over the part I need to cut in.
Yep.
That's her saying yes.
Hey.
Okay, mark in there, and then we'll go down to the
Yes, it's
last
another
word of that
opening,
sentence.
another show, but not just any show.
I think she says killer whales and killer whale trainers.
8x10 glossy to get the director's nod for this project. This is Believe, the new killer whale show at SeaWorld, where the on-stage talent consists of an assortment of killer whales.
Killer whales and killer whale
Killer
train.
whale trainers.
Boom, right there. We'll mark out. And then I can simply patch that down into my timeline. Now keep in mind, I don't want to disrupt the audio from the performance, the B-roll. That's going to be in the A1 track. I want to take her source audio. This is my source panel, so it refers to the source clip I have loaded. Her source, it's one channel, one track of audio, and I want to put it down in, let's say, the A2. So I'll have Nat sound in A1, I'll have the reporter's voice in A2, so that her voice can play at the same time that the performance plays. And I want to go in a couple of seconds, at least 2 seconds, before I drop in her voice. I want it to come in right about here. So 2 seconds of video with Nat sound, and then her voice will come in right here. So I can simply just do an overwrite on this track, and there we go. Now we have performance and then the reporter's audio. Of course, that Nat sounds really loud. We'll go fix that later.
But not just any show, and it would take a lot more than an 8x10 gloss.
So at least we've got the first few pieces in there.
Get the director's nod for this project.
Notice this, when I drop in the reporter's voice and watch the VU,
Believe.
we only see it in the left channel because what we've got is a track that's a mono track. It only has a left channel to it. I'll show you how to fix that. This is what's going to happen most likely when you bring in, it could happen when you bring in your voiceover or even when you bring in your sound bites. You use that little wireless mic or an audio booth mic, and maybe it only comes in one channel, like the left ear. I'll show you later how to put that in both the left and the right ear or right channel so that it will be like a stereo pair. But for now, we're off to a good start. What I want to do just to wrap up this tutorial is walk into a couple of other features. Notice that when I look at my timeline, these tracks, they just look so tiny. I could expand the view here by mousing over, let's say between A1 and A2. I want the A1 track to be larger in the timeline. Mouse over it, and you see it looks like the equal sign. Click it and drag. Okay, now I've got a much larger track. Let's do the same for A2. Open that up a little bit. So that's good. The problem now, though, is that I don't see my overlays. So what I want to do here is click my little wrench right here. These are my timeline displays. Now, they may be turned on by default when you're editing. But if I don't see the audio waveform, I want to check that. See my waveform now? Now it shows in the timeline. I always want to see that. I also want to see my audio keyframes so that when I start laying in keyframes, I will see them. So click the wrench if you don't see the waveform or the keyframes. You should turn those on. Just put a check mark beside it, and you'll have it. You'll also see this. See this little volume line? Let's go in tighter. This little white line running down the middle of the clip. See when I push the arrow, the locator tool? It brings me up that little symbol, the up arrow and the down arrow. I can click and grab that and move the volume up and down. That is one quick way to fix volume. So I mentioned that we had the gain problem on the Nat Sound. It was just too powerful. I could grab this line, bring the whole thing down a couple of decibels. Let's go down about 8. And let's play it back now. Much better.
Yes, it's another opening.
Good. So now the opening sound of the performance doesn't peak way up there. It's not peaking up here at -6. It's averaging -18. Good. And then we'll still fix a few more things with keyframes later. But that was quick. I just reached in, saw the line, dragged it down, and it just lowered the volume for audio track 1, the Nat Sound. Could have done the same for her track, but I fixed it, remember, up here earlier in the source window. So that's a quick look at some of the basic audio tools. So we'll look at keyframing again in the next tutorial.